The Caucasians, the Conference of the Liquidators. And if you don't know what the liquidators were, they were the ones who wanted to cast out the illegal segments of the party. The Caucasians, the Conference of the Liquidators. We spoke above of the warnings of one section of the Caucasian Social Democrats, who were unable to withstand the nationalist epidemic. These waverings were revealed in the fact that, strange as it may seem, the above mentioned Social Democrats followed in the footsteps of the Bund and proclaimed cultural national autonomy. Regional autonomy for the Caucasus as a whole, and cultural national autonomy for the nations forming the Caucasus. That is the way these Social Democrats, who, incidentally, are linked with the Russian liquidators, formulate their demands. Listen to their acknowledged leader, the not unknown N. Here we go. Fucking N. You don't wanna have to listen to N. Quote, everybody knows that the Caucasus differs profoundly from the central Gubernias, both in regards to the racial composition of its population and it as regards its territory and agricultural development. The exploitation and material development of such a region require local workers acquainted with local peculiarities and accustomed to the local climate and culture. All laws designed to further the exploitation of the local territory should be issued locally and put into effect by local forces. Consequently, the jurisdiction of a central organ of Caucasian self-government should extend its legislation on local questions. Hence, the functions of the Caucasian Center should consist in the passing of laws designed to further the economic exploitation of the local territory and the material prosperity of the region. See the Georgian newspaper Shavinsa Church Our Life, number 12, 1912. Editor's note. The original endnote for the footnote is as follows. Chevny Our Life, a daily newspaper published by the Georgian Mensheviks in Kudias from July 1st to the 22nd. Oh, the fucking Mensheviks. 1912. Thus, gubernia from Russian gubernia, an administrative district from Imperial Russia, later territorial and administrative subdivision in Soviet Union. Thank you, Samuel, for getting us the definition. Thus, regional autonomy for the Caucasus. If we abstract ourselves from the rather confused and incoherent arguments of N, it must be admitted that his conclusion is correct. Regional autonomy for the Caucasus, within the framework of a general state constitution, which N does not deny, is indeed essential, because of the peculiarities of its composition and its conditions of life. This was also acknowledged by the Russian Social Democratic Party, which at its second Congress proclaimed regional self-government for those broader regions which, in respect of their conditions of life and the composition of their population, differ from the regions of Russia proper. When Martov submitted this point for discussion at the Second Congress, he justified it on the grounds that the vast extent of Russia and the experience of her centralized administration points to the necessity and expediency of regional self-government for such large units as Finland, Poland, Lithuania, and the Caucasus. But it follows that regional self-government is to be interpreted as regional autonomy. But N goes further. According to him, regional autonomy for the Caucasus, quote, covers only one aspect of the question. So far, we have spoken only of the material development of local life, but the economic development of a region is facilitated not only by economic activity, but also by spiritual, cultural activity. A culturally strong nation is strong also in the economic sphere, but the cultural development of the nation is possible only in the national languages. Consequently, all questions connected with the native language are questions of national culture. Such are the questions of education. The judicature, the church, literature, art, sciences, the theater, etc. If the material development of a region unites nations, matters of national culture disunite them and place them in a separate sphere. Activities of the former kind are associated with a definite territory. This is not the case with matters of national culture. These are associated with a definite territory, but with the existence of definite nation. The fate of the Georgian language interests a Georgian, no matter where he lives. It would be a sign of profound ignorance to say that Georgian culture concerns only the Georgians who live in Georgia. Take, for instance, the Armenian Church. Armenians of various localities and states take part in the administration of its affairs. Territory plays no part here. Or, for instance, the creation of a Georgian museum interests not only the Georgians of Tiflis, but also the Georgians of Baku, Kudias, St. Petersburg, etc. Hence, the administration and control of all affairs of national culture must be left to the nations concerned. We proclaim in favor of cultural national autonomy for the Caucasian nationalities. That's from the same Georgian newspaper, Life. In short, since culture is not territory, and territory is not culture, cultural national autonomy is required. That is all N can say in the latter's favor. We shall not stop to discuss again national cultural autonomy in general. We have already spoken of its objectionable character. We should like to point out only that, while being unsuitable in general, cultural national autonomy is also meaningless and nonsensical in relation to Caucasian conditions. And for the following reason, cultural national autonomy presumes more or less developed nationalities with a developed culture and literature. Failing these conditions, autonomy loses all sense and becomes an absurdity. But in the Caucasus, there are a number of nationalities, each possessing a primitive culture, a separate language, and without its own literature, nationalities. Moreover, which are in a state of transition, partly becoming assimilated and partly continuing to develop. How is cultural national autonomy to be applied to them? What is to be done with such nationalities? How are they to be organized into separate cultural national unions, as is undoubtedly implied in cultural national autonomy? What is to be done with Midrolians, Abkhazians, Agarians, Savanthians, Lechestians, and so on, who speak different languages, but do not possess a literature of their own? To what nations are they attached? Can they be organized into national units? Around what cultural affairs are they to be organized? What is to be done with the Ostians, of whom the Transcaucasian Ostians are becoming assimilated, but are as of yet by no means wholly assimilated by the Georgians, while the Ciscaucasian Ossetians are partly being assimilated by the Russians and partly continuing to develop, and are creating their own literature? How are they to be organized into a single national union? To what national union should one attach Adjarians, who speak the Georgian language, but whose culture is Turkish, and who profess the religion of Islam? Shall they be organized separately from the Georgians with regard to religious affairs, and together with the Georgians with regards to other cultural affairs? And what about the Culbetians, the Ingishes, and the Inglehoys? What kind of autonomy is that which excludes a whole number of nationalities from the list? No, that is not a solution of the national question, but the fruit of idle fancy. But let us grant the impossible and assume that our ends national cultural autonomy has been put into effect. All right, we're in La La Land now. We're in La La Land, imagining an ends national cultural autonomy has been taken into effect. Stalin's doing a thought experiment now. Where would it lead to? And what would be its results? Take, for instance, the Transcaucasian Tartars. With their minimum percentage of literatures, their schools controlled by the omnipotent mullahs, and their culture permeated by the religious spirit. It is not difficult to understand that to organize them into a cultural national union would mean to place them under the control of the mullahs, to deliver them over to the tender mercies of the reactionary mullahs, to create a new stronghold of spiritual enslavement of the Tartar masses to their worst enemies. But since when have social democrats made it a practice to bring gist to the mill of the reactionaries? Could the Caucasian liquidators really find nothing better to proclaim than the isolation of the Transcaucasian Tartars within the Cultural National Union, which would place the masses under the thraldom of vicious reactionaries? No, that is no solution to the national question. The national question in the Caucasus can be solved only by drawing the belated nations and nationalities into a common stream of a higher culture. It is the only progressive solution, and the only solution acceptable to social democracy. Regional autonomy in the Caucasus is acceptable because it would draw the belated nations into the common cultural development. It would help them cast off the shell of small national insularity. It would impel them forward and facilitate access to the benefits of higher culture. Cultural national autonomy, however, acts in diametrically opposite direction because it shuts up the nation within their old shells, blinds them to the lower stages of cultural development, and prevents them from rising to the higher stages of culture. In this way, national autonomy counteracts the beneficial aspects of regional autonomy and nullifies it. That is why the mixed type of autonomy, which combines national cultural autonomy and regional autonomy, as proposed by N, is also unsuitable. This unnatural combination does not improve matters, but makes them worse. Because in addition to retarding the development of the belated nations, it transforms regional autonomy into an arena of conflict between the nations organized in the national unions. Thus, cultural national autonomy, which is unsuitable generally, would be a senseless, reactionary undertaking in the Caucasus. So much for the cultural national autonomy of N and his Caucasian fellow thinkers. Whether the Caucasian liquidators will take a step forward and follow in the footsteps of the Bund on the question of organization, also the future will show. So far, in the history of social democracy, federalism in organization always preceded national autonomy in program. The Austrian Social Democrats introduced organizational federalism as far back as 1897. And it was only 2 years later 1899, that they adopted national autonomy. The Bundists spoke distinctly of national autonomy for the first time in 1901, whereas organizational federalism had been practiced by them since 1897. The Caucasian liquidators have begun from the end, from national autonomy. If they continue to follow in the footsteps of the Bund, they will first have to demolish the whole existing organizational edifice, which was erected at the end of the 90s on the basis of internationalism. But, easy though it was to adopt national autonomy, which is still not understood by the workers, it will be difficult to demolish an edifice which it has taken years to build, and which has been raised and cherished by the workers of all the nationalities of the Caucasus. This Herostratian undertaking has only to begun, and the eyes of the workers will be open to the nationalist character of cultural national autonomy. While the Caucasians are settling the national question in the usual manner by means of verbal and written discussion, the All Russian Conference of the Liquidators has invented a most unusual method. It is a simple and easy method. Listen to this. Quote, having heard the communication of the Caucasian delegation to the effect that it is necessary to demand national cultural autonomy, this conference, while expressing no opinion on the merits of this demand, declares that such an interpretation of the clause of the program, which recognizes the right of every nationality to self-determination, does not contradict the precise meaning of the program. Unquote. Thus, first of all, they express no opinion on the merits of the question, and they declare an original method. And what does this original conference declare? That the demand for national cultural autonomy does not contradict the precise meaning of the program, which recognizes the right of the nations of self-determination. Let us examine this proposition. The clause on self-determination speaks of the right of nations. According to this clause, nations have the right not only of autonomy, but also of succession. It is a question of political self-determination. Whom did the liquidators want to fool when they endeavored to misinterpret this right of nations to political self-determination, which has long been recognized by the whole of international social democracy? Or perhaps the liquidators will try to wriggle out of this situation and defend themselves by the sophism that cultural national autonomy does not contradict the right of nations. That is to say, if all the nations in a given state agree to arrange their affairs on the basis of cultural national autonomy, they, the given sum of nations, are fully entitled to do so, and nobody may forcibly impose a different form of political life on them. This is both new and clever. Should it not be added that, speaking generally, a nation has the right to abolish its own constitution, replace it with a system of tyranny, and revert to the old order on the grounds that the nation, and the nation alone, has the right to determine its own destiny? We repeat, in this sense, neither cultural national autonomy nor any other kind of nationalist reaction contradicts the right of nations. Is that what the esteemed conference wanted to say? No, not that. It specifically says that cultural national autonomy does not contradict not the right of nations, but the precise meaning of the program. The program here is the program and not the right of nations. And that is quite understandable. If it were some nation that addressed itself to the Conference of Liquidators, the conference might have directly declared that the nation has a right to cultural national autonomy. But it was not a nation that addressed itself to the conference, but a delegation of Caucasian social democrats. Bad social democrats. It is true. But social democrats nevertheless. And they inquired not about the right of nations, but whether cultural national autonomy contradicted the principles of social democracy, whether it did not contradict the precise meaning of the program of social democracy. Thus, the rights of nations and the precise meaning of the program of social democracy are not one and the same thing. Evidently, there are demands which, while they do not contradict the rights of nations, may yet contradict the precise meaning of the program. For example, the program of the Social Democrats contains a clause on freedom of religion. According to this clause, any group of persons have the right to profess any religion they please. Catholicism, the religion of the Orthodox Church, etc. Social Democrats will combat all forms of religious persecution, be it of members of the Orthodox Church, Catholics, or Protestants. Does this mean that Catholicism, Protestantism, etc., do not contradict the precise meaning of the program? No, it does not. Social Democrats will always protest against persecution of Catholicism or Protestantism. They will always defend the rights of nations to profess any religion they please. But at the same time, on the basis of a correct understanding of the interests of the proletariat. They will carry on agitation against Catholicism, Protestantism, and the religion of the Orthodox Church in order to achieve the triumph of the socialist world outlook. And they will do so just because there is no doubt that Protestantism, Catholicism, and the religion of the Orthodox Church, etc., contradict the precise meaning of the program, i.e., they correctly understood the interests of the proletariat. The same must be said of self-determination. Nations have a right to arrange their affairs as they please. They have a right to preserve any of their national institutions, whether beneficial or harmful. Nobody has a right to, forcibly interfere in the life of a nation. But that does not mean that social democracy will not combat and agitate against the harmful institutions of nations and against the inexpedient demands of nations. On the contrary, it is the duty of social democracy to conduct such agitation and to endeavor to influence the will of nations so that the nations may arrange their affairs in the way that will best correspond to the interests of the proletariat. For this reason, social democracy, while fighting for the right of nations to self-determination, will at the same time agitate, for instance, against the succession of the Tartars, or against the cultural national autonomy of the Caucasian nations. For both, while not contradicting the rights of these nations, do contradict the precise meaning of the program, i.e., the interests of the Caucasian proletariat. Obviously, the rights of nations and the precise meaning of the program are on two entirely different planes. Whereas the precise meaning of the program expresses the interests of the proletariat, it's scientifically formulated in the program of the latter, the rights of the nations may express the interests of any class, bourgeois, aristocracy, clergy, etc., depending on the strength and influence of these classes. On the one hand are the duties of Marxists, on the other the rights of nations, which consists of various classes. So rights of nations and the principle of social democracy may or may not contradict each other, just as, say, the pyramid of Cheops may or may not contradict the famous conference of the liquidators. They are simply not compatible. But it follows that the esteemed conference most unpardonably muddled two entirely different things. The result obtained was not a solution of the national question, but its absurdity, according to which the rights of nations and the principle of social democracy do not contradict each other. And consequently, every demand of a nation may be made compatible with the interests of the proletariat. Consequently, no demand of a nation which is striving for self determination will contradict the precise meaning of the program. They pay no heed to logic. It was this absurdity that gave rise to the now famous resolution of the Conference of the Liquidators, which declares that the demand for national cultural autonomy does not contradict the precise meaning of the program. But it was not only the laws of logic that were violated by the Conference of the Liquidators. By sanctioning cultural national autonomy, it also violated its duty to the Russian social democracy. It most definitely did violate the precise meaning of the program, for it is well known that the Second Congress, which adopted the program, emphatically repudiated cultural national autonomy. Here is what was said at the Congress in this connection. Goldblatt, Bundist. I deem it necessary that special institutions be set up to protect the freedom of cultural development of nationalities, and I therefore propose that the following words be added. Quote, the creation of institutions which will guarantee them complete freedom of cultural development. Unquote. This, as we know, is the Bund's definition of cultural national autonomy. Stalin's note. Martinov pointed out that the general institutions must also be constituted so as to protect particular interests also. It is impossible to create a special institution to guarantee freedom for cultural development of nationalities. Yurgorov. On the question of nationality, we can adopt only negative proposals, i.e., we are opposed to all restrictions upon nationality. But we, as social democrats, are not concerned with whether any particular nationality will develop as such. That is a spontaneous process. Kolstov. The delegation from the Bund are always offended when their nationalism is referred to. Yet the amendment proposed by the delegate from the Bund is of purely nationalist character. We are asked to take purely offensive measures in order to support even nationalities that are dying out. Unquote. In the end, Goldblatt's amendment was rejected by the majority. Only 3 votes were being cast for it. Thus, it is clear that the Conference of the Liquidators did contradict the precise meaning of the program. It violated the program. The liquidators are now trying to justify themselves by referring to the Stockholm Congress, which they allege sanctioned cultural national autonomy. Thus, V. Kosovsky writes, quote, as we know, according to the agreement adopted by the Stockholm Congress, the Bund was allowed to preserve its national program, pending a decision on the national question by a General Party Congress. This Congress recorded that national cultural autonomy, at any rate, does not contradict the General Party program. From that magazine, Our Life, or whatever the fuck. But the efforts of the liquidators are in vain. The Stockholm Congress never thought of sanctioning the program of the Bund. It merely agreed to leave the question open for the time being. The brave Kosovsky did not have enough courage to tell the whole truth. But the facts speak for themselves. Here they are. An amendment was moved by Galen. Quote, the question of the national program is left open in view of the fact that it is not being examined by the Congress. 50 votes for, 50 votes against. 50 votes for, 32 votes against. Voice, what does that mean? Open. Chairman, when we say that the national question is left open, it means that the Bund may maintain its decision on this question until the next Congress. R. Italics, Stalin. See Nashi Slovo, number 8, 1906. As you see, the Congress even did not examine the question of the national program of the Bund. It simply left it open, leaving the Bund itself to decide the fate of its program until the next General Congress met. In other words, the Stockholm Congress avoided the question, expressing no opinion on cultural national autonomy one way or another. The Conference of the Liquidators, however, most definitely undertakes to give an opinion on the matter, declares cultural national autonomy to be acceptable, and endorses it in the name of the party program. The difference is only too evident. Thus, in spite of all of its artifices, the Conference of the Liquidators did not advance the national question a single step. All it could do was squirm before the Bund and the Caucasian National Liquidators. That's part 6.